Hi, I'm Jeremy, the Zoo Nerd, coming to you live from my home in Los Angeles, California. How are you doing today? I hope you're well. I hope you're happy, healthy, and having some fun. Today, for our Catterday issue of Critter Chat, we're going to be talking about one of the most elusive cats on the planet. Today, we're talking about snow leopards. Snow leopards are often called the ghosts of the mountain. That is because they live in a very remote area and can easily blend in and camouflage with their surroundings. So they come from Central Asia. They live up in the high mountains, and a lot of those mountains are very rocky with little or no vegetation. And their coat coloring blends in perfectly with the rocks and dirt around them. So they have kind of a smoky cream to gray colored coat with black spots, similar to like a leopard or a jaguar. For many years, they were kind of put in their own genus of cats. That's in the scientific taxonomy, or the way that scientists organize animals and say who they're related to. Probably about 10 years or so ago, there was new genetic evidence that they were indeed fairly closely related to the other large cats. So they are now part of the genus Panthera, which includes tigers, lions, jaguars, and leopards. They are not a true leopard. They're not a subspecies of a leopard. They are their own species, for sure. There are a lot of differences between them and leopards. They were given the leopard name because they kind of look similar to a leopard in size and with their spotted coats. But the areas that they live, the countries they're from, include 12 different countries: Afghanistan, Bhutan, China, India, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Mongolia, Nepal, Pakistan, Russia, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. Now, if those countries don't sound familiar to you, or if you're wondering where this is, it's kind of the area between India and China that's furthest west of both of those countries. So they're in a very mountainous area, starting with the Himalayas, the tallest mountains in the world, going up through the Tibetan Plateau of western China and into southern Russia and the mountains in South Siberia. They are very, very well adapted to living in a mountainous environment. In fact, they have been observed at 18,000 feet above sea level, making them one of the highest elevation mammals in the world, and for sure the highest elevation of any of the big predators and the large cats. They have a lot of great adaptations to living in such a high, harsh environment, including strong muscular bodies. Their rear legs are slightly longer than their front legs, and that enables them to be incredible jumpers, jumping up mountains and coming down mountains. They've been marked at jumping nearly 50 feet, and their great athletic ability to do so helps them in catching their prey. Their fur is also the densest fur coat of all cat species, with about 26,000 hairs in a square inch. That's very impressive. Humans usually have just over 1,000 hairs on a square inch of like our head. So they have a very, very dense coat. Not nearly as dense as like a sea otter, which holds the record for the densest fur, but very dense coat for a cat. And their hairs are pretty long. They're pretty fluffy, long hairs to keep them warm. They can easily live in places where it gets 40 below zero Fahrenheit. So very cold winter conditions in much of their range. Now, although they can go as high as 18,000 feet, typically that would be a summer place. They'll kind of migrate up and down the mountainside due to the weather and the seasons. So summertime, they're going to be a little higher up. Wintertime, they're going to come further down. And that's because their prey, the food sources that they're looking for, are usually mountain goats and mountain sheep. And those animals need to be able to find some little vegetation, so little grasses, bushes, things like that to eat. and the snow leopards will follow where the prey sources go. They also have kind of a denser face kind of looking. Their ears are smaller than other cats of their size. They're kind of a thicker, muscular body, helps to preserve their body heat. They also have super long tails. Their tail is almost as long as their entire body, with tail measurements usually in the 30 to 40 inch range. They have huge tails, and they're big, thick tails too. Those help them to balance as they're running on the steep slopes of the mountains. But they also use those as kind of like a scarf and wrap it around, especially around their face covering, during those really snowy, cold conditions to help keep their face a little warmer. When you're that high up in elevation, you also need to be a little more concerned about oxygen levels. As you go up in elevation, the air becomes thinner, there's less oxygen available to breathe. To adapt to that, snow leopards have very large nasal passages, so they can breathe in a lot of air at a single breath. And they also have smaller and more dense red blood cells. Red blood cells are the cells of blood that help move oxygen around their body, and that's a pretty unique adaptation to have to help process that oxygen, even though it's so rare. Their large nasal passage also helps warm up the air as they're breathing it in on cold times before it gets to their lungs, which are full of very sensitive cells that could get damaged from some of that sub-freezing air. In addition to that, they're capable of hunting prey that can weigh 3 times what they do. The sheep and goats that they hunt are called blue sheep, or also Asiatic ibex, and a type of mountain sheep called the argali. Argali are a very near threatened species of wild sheep, and they're the biggest wild sheep in the world. They can weigh in over 400 pounds for some of the record holders in argali, and that's a big animal for a snow leopard to be bringing down by itself. Snow leopards are solitary, they live alone. Males have a very large home range, often in like the 80 to 100 square mile home range. Females would be a little smaller, typically around like 45 to 55 square mile home range. So they will overlap with each other, but it's rare that they will come together only for breeding or a mom with her kittens. So for communicating, for finding each other, scent marking is super important for them. They will use a variety of different ways to scent mark, including scratching on trees or near rocks. They'll rub their cheeks. They have a scent gland in their face, and that can leave kind of a scent, their smell out there for the other cats to find. And then they'll also do something where they scratch in the dirt, and then they either poo or pee in, or both, into that indentation, and that helps them know that they're in the area, which is important for when they need to find each other to breed. And also if they're 2 males, they'll know each other's around and kind of keep their distance from each other. They don't typically fight much with each other. They'll kind of use avoidance as their biggest way of staying apart if there's kind of competition or threats in that regard. With their scent marking, that is one of their communications. They do also do some vocal communications, but they are the only large cat that is not capable of being able to roar. So they don't roar like a lion, a tiger, jaguar, or leopard. Their sounds are a bit softer, more like meows, chuffing. I have heard some snow leopards, and they are capable of making a fairly large sound. I'll see if I can find some sound clips to share later on today. So let's talk size of snow leopards. They are considered a large cat, although they're not nearly as big as, say, like a lion or a tiger. Females typically weigh between about 75 and 95 pounds, and the males are a bit bigger, coming in at about 100 pounds to 125 pounds. With that, they're only about 2 feet tall at the shoulder, so they're pretty low to the ground. This helps them to maintain their body temperature so they don't get cold in their high elevations. They are also about 40 to 50 inches long, so roughly 4 feet in length, between 3.5 and 4 feet in length, with another 30 to 40 inch tail after that. So their tails are almost as long as the rest of their body. When they do come together and breed, the female is then pregnant, or her gestation period is between 98 and 104 days, which is about 3.5 months. She'll usually give birth to 2 kittens or cubs, sometimes 1, sometimes 3, on rare occasions 4. 2 is the average. Like most other cats, they are born with their eyes closed. Their eyes open about 7 days old. At about 2 months old, they start moving around a bit more, and they're able to start eating some solid food. So the mom would usually have a den. Typically it's hidden in like a little cave or an indentation around some big rocks. Sometimes near a tree. If there's a big tree in the area that has fallen, she might use that in some areas of the range. But she'll leave the cubs at home for about those first 3 months. At about 3 months old, they start to follow her on her hunt. And then they'll stay with her for about 1.5 years to just short of 2 years. And then they're out on their own, with being able to reproduce typically at about the 2-year or 3-year mark, depending on if it's a boy or a girl. With that, they can live about 10 to 13 years out in the wild, which is a decent time. But in a zoo setting, they can live into their 20s, which is pretty impressive. Again, they can live longer in zoos because they don't have to hunt down their prey. They get medical care for things like arthritis, or if they get a bad leg, or if they start to lose their eyesight, things that would certainly cause them to die sooner. Out in the wild, in a zoo, they can get medication and care that will help them live through that a bit longer. So snow leopards are listed as vulnerable to extinction, despite the fact that they live over a big range of 12 countries. Their population numbers are not that high. They probably never were that high because they live in such big home ranges. They need a lot of space, and their harsh environment doesn't support a lot of prey species, and then they need a decent amount of food to eat. So their major threats are all caused by humans, with hunting or poaching for their beautiful fur coat still being a big issue, but historically has been even bigger. It is illegal to hunt a snow leopard. It still does happen in some places. Many of these countries have very remote areas, especially their desert conditions. Several of those countries have been involved in wars in recent years, and whenever people are having wars, it's very hard on the local animals, because there's a lot of people out there with guns, and occasionally the animals get shot from things like that. Also, they are sometimes hunted for other body parts, their teeth, their claws. All of those things are sought after for many of the big cat species, and snow leopards are no exception there. Habitat loss is also a huge threat for them, probably the biggest threat today, due to things like mining and limited prey species caused by competition from grazing of farm animals like goats and sheep and yaks up in the mountains and in some of those meadow pastures. That pushes the wild goats and sheep out a little more, and then there's less food for the snow leopards. There are also, as humans have moved higher into some of those mountains with the mining operations and with livestock and farming, conflict with humans has become an issue as well, especially in places where their prey species are depleted. The argali, the big sheep, are actually listed as near threatened as well, so they're becoming more and more rare. That means the snow leopards, if they can't find food, will attack domestic things like sheep and goats instead, and that often ends poorly for the hunter, or the rancher who owns the sheep and goats will hunt the snow leopard, and the snow leopard usually doesn't do well in that situation. Their estimated population is between 4,000 and 6,500. That may sound very low, but that is still more than all the kinds of tigers put together. So it's not as grim for snow leopards as it is for some animals. That's also similar to the population numbers for like a cheetah. So they are certainly an animal we need to be concerned about, but they're not as severely threatened as many of the other species out there or that I've talked about in Critter Chats. There are also about 600 of them in zoos around the world, which is a really nice, healthy captive population, and they do fairly well in zoos. Because of where they live, they not only live in very cold winters, they also live in pretty hot summers, especially in the southern portion of their range. Places like India, Afghanistan, Pakistan all get very hot. Those areas are also very dry. So genetically, these cats are fairly good at adapting to different climate ranges, and they can do well in zoos that aren't even that cold. For example, San Diego Zoo has had snow leopards for years, and they've had quite a bit of success breeding them, as well as the Los Angeles Zoo, even though those are both two zoos in warm areas without much winter that you would normally associate with a snow leopard. Our special shout out today is for a great conservation organization called the Snow Leopard Trust. It was an organization started in 1981 by a former zookeeper from the Woodland Park Zoo in Seattle. It is still running in Seattle, although that former zookeeper is no longer with us. She has died, but she started the Snow Leopard Trust as a way to help really raise awareness of snow leopards and really start to work with a lot of those countries, many of which struggle economically, and the people in those countries are fairly poor and have very humble means of taking care of themselves. They've really done a lot of great work in helping change laws in many of those countries and encourage people to protect the wildlife. Snow Leopard Trust is one of the great conservation organizations that's now been around almost 40 years, doing a lot of really great work. I'll share some of their stories and successes later on today. Recently, they were able to help Kyrgyzstan create a new animal sanctuary out of a place that used to be a hunting preserve. So that where people used to go to hunt the animals is now a protected wildlife sanctuary to protect not only the snow leopards, but also the argali and the ibex, which the snow leopards need for food. So that's one of their recent successes. My experiences with snow leopards is kind of a fun journey through my lifetime. I didn't even know about this animal when I was a kid. I had no idea it existed. I never saw anything about it. I never heard anything about it. I never read anything about it. I may have somehow seen a picture in like a book when I was little, but I did not ever see one until I was a teenager. And I saw my first snow leopard at Utah's Hogle Zoo when they first got them, or first time in my lifetime I saw one was when they had them. And I was absolutely captivated because they are such an incredibly beautiful animal. And although they can move much like another cat, their coloration and their big long hair really kind of makes it even more impressive and striking to see them stalking something, even at a zoo when they're stalking like a little bird or something. I was very impressed early on by the beauty of a snow leopard. Later on, I learned more about them, of course, and in my time at the Los Angeles Zoo, we had snow leopards there. I never worked directly with them. By the time they got really up and going with the breeding program that is in place now, I had been moved into a zookeeper position taking care of more hoofed animals, so I was taking care of more of their prey species than the carnivores. But I worked nearby the snow leopards. I would often see them on a daily basis when I was working in that area, taking care of some of the other animals that lived by them at the zoo. And I would often see and hear the snow leopards early in the morning before anyone else was really around in the zoo, before we were open. And during that time, I often saw some very interesting behaviors, such as them stalking squirrels or little birds in their exhibit. I heard and saw multiple communications as they were getting ready for their breeding season, and definitely during their breeding season was a very interesting experience to observe. During the summer of 2017, 2 snow leopard cubs were born at the Los Angeles Zoo. That was during my time as a zookeeper taking care of the hoofed animals. And so I was able to be around and see those cubs grow and progress, as I could kind of drop in and see them once they were on exhibit. I have a video of them kind of playing around when they're probably about 4 or 5 months old that I'll share later today. Super cute. I love watching any of the big cats when their babies are around that age, because they're super curious about everything, and it's really fun to watch them play and interact. Also, I have seen snow leopards now in multiple zoos across the country, and if you live near a zoo with snow leopards, I definitely encourage you to learn a little more about them, and on your next trip or visit to a zoo, take some time to really watch them. Especially if it's a cooler morning, that's kind of their more active time. Oh, we didn't talk about that. Snow leopards are crepuscular. So many of the big cats, lions, tigers, jaguars, leopards, are usually more nocturnal or active at night. But because of the cold temperatures where a snow leopard lives, it's going to be a little more crepuscular, or dawn and dusk, sleeping during the coldest time of the day, during the middle of the night. That way they can get their hunting in the morning. If they don't catch anything, they'll try again in the afternoon, and that way they get some good food going. Yeah, they are pretty low-key during the night, usually sleeping during the coldest time frame. I hope you've enjoyed what I shared with you today on this very special Catterday Critter Chat about snow leopards. As always, I will be uploading this full video on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook, so if you caught only part of it, you can catch the rest later on. Also, feel free to like, share, follow, and subscribe to all of my platforms on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, as well as my website, Jeremy the Zoo Nerd, at jeremythezooNerd.com. There's more photos and material being uploaded there on a regular basis. So until tomorrow, take care. Oh, not tomorrow. Tomorrow's Sunday, so I'm taking the day off. So I will see you again on Monday, and take care. Have fun. Be safe. Bye.